Welcome to the video on the 21st century and the problem and the opportunity of the internet. In this video, we're going to talk about some of the different aspects of the internet that create interesting issues for the magazine market. So on the problem side, we have the balancing of principles and commercial interests, the difficulties inherent in reaching online markets and the problems of more competition for readers' attention. On the opportunity side, new ways to reach your markets, new opportunities being created, the way that print and digital can complement each other through things like apps and websites and new subscription models. So starting with the problem, as you might expect from a video that I'm doing, girls' magazines kind of come to mind as a key example. They were one of the biggest casualties of the rise of the internet, and in the UK in particular, there are basically no mainstream teen magazines left anymore. There's one or two left in the US, and you still find some more niche market ones occasionally popping up for a while, sometimes lasting a little longer. And the teen magazine market sort of epitomizes part of the problem of the internet, in that there's a lot more stuff available to read online. Lots of it's free. Lots of it enables you to reach much more directly the people with whom you share interests in common, and enables you to go out and do the things that you might previously have done through reading magazines more directly without having to go out and spend money, buy a piece of paper, which then clutters up your life. So girls' magazines kind of work as a microcosm of the whole thing. And in particular, we have Teen Vogue. I'm not sure why half of that screen is white. I've tried it on several different browsers. There's clearly something supposed to be there in the middle where there's a pause symbol. I'm not sure why it's coming up, but Teen Vogue's a really interesting example. Obviously an offshoot of Vogue magazine itself. They were pretty successful in their day as a print magazine. In the last few years, I think in about 2017, they started to become more and more overtly political, and you can see the examples there. There's politics as well as the more traditional Vogue territory of fashion and entertainment just in that homepage. They became more political, leading to one of my favourite tweets of all time, which says something like, "The year is 2017, America is a tire fire. The resistance is led by Teen Vogue, Badlands National Park and the Merriam-Webster Dictionary." And I'll put a link to that, and indeed to the Badlands National Park and Merriam-Webster up on Moodle for you. So Teen Vogue was kind of at the spearhead of a political resurgence among young people in 2017, but it was not enough to save the print edition. And not that long afterwards, Teen Vogue moved to online only, and it's still going as online only. You can subscribe, you can read the app, you can read the articles online, and obviously they make a lot of money from advertising and so on as well. But their print edition didn't survive. And sadly lamented Rookie magazine, sort of at the other end of the spectrum from Teen Vogue, obviously owned by one of the big conglomerates, an offshoot of Vogue magazine itself. Rookie was started by a teen girl, Tavi Jevonson, and she'd originally been a fashion blogger in an indie sort of way. She started recording videos of the clothes she was choosing to wear, and she started up a magazine. It's a very deliberately indie aesthetic, as you can see from kind of the collage and the artwork visible on that homepage. It ran for a few years. It produced some very beautiful print annuals, kind of bringing together some of the best of the year's material. It folded in 2018. I recommend you go to the website. The website's still up, and read the goodbye letter that the editor wrote. It's the one that's centrally linked on that screenshot there, which includes a really interesting discussion of the thought processes she went through in deciding to let the magazine fold rather than to sell it or to seek various forms of financial support through venture capital or more advertising or different models like that. I don't think she uses the phrase selling out anywhere, but kind of implicit in a lot of what she says is the idea that selling out would be contrary to the spirit of Rookie magazine. So the magazine's still there. There's still some really great content there. And I think her letter really sums up a lot of those issues. So I recommend you read it. So teenage girls magazines haven't really survived the rise of the internet, but there's still, as you know, lots and lots of magazines have survived. Particular either side of girls magazines, there's still a decent market for magazines for younger children and for older people, for women. The women's magazine market is still going, and obviously there's lots of kind of wider lifestyle magazines and so on, and loads of really interesting niche magazines, some of which have kind of been opened up and given opportunities by the internet. You might not see them in your local newsagent, but there's lots that you're able to find online. The ones I'm going to use as examples are partly a demonstration of my personal interests, but you'll find similar ones for whatever it is you're interested in. So this is the Instagram page for Outdoor Swimmer magazine. Outdoor swimming's sort of been having a bit of a renaissance anyway, so there might have been a rise in magazines for it. They describe themselves as the only outdoor swimming magazine, and that's more or less true, but there's lots of kind of associated publications and organisations and things around it. So if this is the only magazine, there's also lots of other things that function in a magazine-y sort of way around outdoor swimming. And Instagram, of course, is in some ways the ideal social media for websites because it's all about pictures, and it gives producers the opportunity to engage quite directly with their readers, to be part of, in this case, the community of outdoor swimmers, and encourage engagement that way. And in some ways, pictures might be kind of one of the defining features of magazines. The glossy cover photo, the ways that pictures and text interact much more directly in magazines even than in newspapers, and certainly than in most books. So Instagram's a really interesting place to go looking for magazines and to see how they present themselves on there. I think these examples are interesting because the picture in the middle of the top row is clearly a kind of candid snap, presumably of two of the writers or editors of the magazine. But other than that, they're quite kind of glamour shots. Obviously, the front cover is a bit glam, and you can't really see the photos in the bottom row, but they're from what you can see, the bright blue sky and the kind of murky water and then the landscape above, there's something kind of beautiful and glamorous about the way they're posed, and then juxtaposed with the ordinary people wearing their swim gear. So it's a nice mix of that kind of professional and approachable, which Instagram offers, which is a really big, useful selling point for this magazine. And then we have sites like Pocket Mags, and obviously other places like Amazon and so on do this kind of thing too, where you can subscribe to your favourite magazines and receive the online versions. And they have a sister site called, I think it's called National Magazines, where you can subscribe to the print. But the idea that here through this website or through their app, you can read all of your different magazines, and you can subscribe to as many as you want, which is an interesting point of view from the magazine's point of view, because it's perhaps a more reliable income stream than the older model of people going into a shop and buying a magazine, perhaps more spontaneously. If someone has subscribed to the digital version, then that money continues to trickle in. You have fewer overheads to support your digital subscribers, no need to pay for warehousing and printing and so on. Obviously, production costs to actually design and lay out the magazine and create the content don't change. So there's some interesting stuff going on there in the ways that the financial backing of magazines can change based on whether they're going more towards print or more towards digital. The downside of sites like Pocket Mags is there are so many magazines on there that it can be quite hard to stand out, to reach your audience. So while you might get people who are magazine junkies who are kind of on there scrolling through looking for things, you're perhaps less likely to find your actual targeted readers there, you'll be more likely to try and find them elsewhere and then channel them into something like Pocket Perks, which is indeed what the Outdoor Swim magazine does. If you want to subscribe, it channels you through there. Now another social media advert. This one is just interesting because it came up while I was in the process of preparing for this video. I was on Facebook. This is my Facebook account, suitably blurred out to protect my friends' anonymity. And there's an advert for Aikido magazine. Pretty successful targeting, actually. It's a science magazine for small children, or maybe for the parents of small children. I'm the parent of a 4-year-old. I'm pretty squarely in the market for these people. It's a print magazine, but advertising online and advertising specifically at parents, because obviously a 4-year-old is too young to be using social media in their own right. Pom Pom is a knitting magazine. This one I think is interesting because it's offering both print and digital subscriptions. Their print editions are really nice. They've produced very nice production values, quite serious, weighty objects that look like nice objects to hold. But if you can kind of zoom in there and see her small print, the print and the digital subscription prices are the same, which I think is quite interesting. That is admittedly the subscription discount on print. If you were to buy an individual issue in a knitting shop, which is where they sell their print issues, you'd pay a bit more. But print and digital become slightly different. There are slightly different pros and cons of them depending on the niche market you're in. In the knitting market, for example, there's some advantages to print for what is essentially a pattern magazine, because if you're knitting a knitting pattern, you might want to scribble on it to circle the numbers you're using, or make a note of where you're up to or something like that. But on the other hand, a digital knitting pattern you can take with you. You don't need to take a weighty magazine. If you're knitting on the go, you can just have it on your phone. So there's sort of different kind of affordances to print and digital. And you'll find similar sorts of issues playing out in other niche markets, depending on the different advantages of print and digital, which might influence the kind of pricing structure that you see. Now, Strange Horizons is an interesting one. This is a Patreon website I've got a screenshot of here. Strange Horizons is a weekly science fiction magazine, which is published online for free, but it's supported in part by people subscribing to their Patreon at $1, $4 or $6 a month. There's one more subscription level, which I think is probably $10. For $1, you don't get a lot extra. You're just supporting because you support the idea. But for the higher subscription levels, you get the $4 one, for example, which I think is probably the most popular. What you get is an ebook at the end of the month of that month's issues of the magazine. So you can read their stories and their articles online for free. Anyone can. If you're a subscriber, however, you get them turned into an ebook and sent to you in the format of your ebook format of your choice. So again, it's an interesting different formatting question that there's no print edition here, but a Kindle maybe, or other kind of e-reader edition is a different sort of thing from reading it on a web page. Potentially an extra value for money proposition, which supports the magazine's ongoing mission to publish its material for free. And in the same sort of vein, we see a scattering of magazines using crowdfunders of various kinds, so things like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, as well as this one's from crowdfunder.co.uk. This is a Scottish culture magazine called The Skinny, which, as it says there, was forced to cease publication during lockdown, and they successfully ran a crowdfunder campaign to raise some money to restart. I think they're currently not quite publishing print again, but they are producing new online material, and they are offering print subscriptions for the future print runs that they will be doing for future issues. So kind of to sum up, I mean, I've titled this The Problem or the Opportunity of the Internet, and I think hopefully it's become clear that I think it's both. The internet has thrown away a lot of our old assumptions about the way that this kind of text media, print media works, and magazines perhaps particularly. and newspapers have very similar sorts of issues, but operating some different kinds of ways as well. I think the initial way that some magazines struggled might have been to do with a lack of understanding of the opportunities that the internet can offer the magazine industry. And as with many things in the wake of the internet becoming more prominent, more widely used, we've seen a massive surge in tiny little indie producers, as well as new ways that the large-scale producers are taking advantage of these things. So although the internet has brought more kind of free content to everyone and more things that people might be doing, which might therefore decrease the market for magazines, it's also made possible a whole swathe of tiny niche magazines which couldn't really have existed before the internet. In, say, the 1980s, there wouldn't have been the same sort of way for example, the outdoor swimming community to make contact with each other enough to support a magazine. Knitting's a bit different because knitting magazines have always been funneled through knitting shops, which are inevitably were inevitably before the internet a kind of a focal point for the knitting community. You go into a shop to buy your yarn and you could buy a magazine at the same time. But for things like science fiction magazines, for outdoor swimming magazines, and those other kinds of niches that rely less on physical objects, the internet has presented a massive new opportunity to reach audiences that you wouldn't have been able to before. So I think the interesting thing here is the way that the different magazines, the different niches, the different markets balance the advantages they can get from print and from digital. So you have things like the Archido Science magazine for children. It doesn't have a digital edition, does have quite a strong online presence. There's a website with resources and materials, and as we saw, they advertise online, but the magazine itself is in print. And then we get others which are digital only, like Strange Horizons, and others which balance both, like the Outdoor Swimmer magazine. And probably most of the magazines you're familiar with will be balancing both, but depending on what kinds of hobbies you're into, how niche they are, you might know of a whole swathe of other online only magazines which target directly the people who are involved. So that's all I've got to say on the subject of the internet.